Welcome to the Real Life Moms podcast, where we put ourselves at the top of our to-do lists. I'm Lisa Foster, your host, and today I'm excited to have mindful art teacher and coach Cynthia Hawk with us. And she's here to help educate us on mindful art, which I am super curious about and think it's going to be really helpful for us. Hi, Cynthia. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I love your tagline of having you at the top of your own to-do list. Yes.
Yes, and it took me a long time to put myself there. Yes, I love it too. So thank you. Okay, so we're all curious, I think, hearing mindful art. What is mindful art? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I largely help busy people, and especially for your listeners, hello, hi, busy moms, to manage stress, reduce stress, to feel more calm, to feel more focused, and to do that really through very simple art activities like drawing, painting. There's certain techniques I teach that are not focused on the art techniques themselves, but instead are combined with mindfulness. And mindfulness is a really big buzzword, but usually I say it's largely just about being right here, right now, in a very kind way to ourselves. And so I've found over the years of doing this for my own practice and working with students now that they're really simple practices you can do in 2 or 5 minutes that are like a reset in your day. Exactly what you talked about, being able to put yourself at the top of your list. They're essentially a form of self care that's
Mm.
done creatively and simply.
Oh, I love it because you always hear the typical ways, right? Like meditate, go for a walk, all the things, right? But you don't really think of art to help calm your system or reground and regulate yourself. Okay, first of all, I'm going to point out I love that you said you don't have to be an artist. It's not about the art, right? It sounds like you don't even have to be necessarily good at it, right? Good.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great because not all, apparently, my children have told me that I'm a very talented kindergartner when it comes to drawing. So,
Amazing.
yeah, so it's good to hear. Tell us a little bit about why it helps us calm or decrease stress.
Yeah, there's a few different ways, and this has been backed by science as well. What I really love, and the easiest way I like to explain it, is that if you've ever noticed that you're doing something with your hands, maybe you are just doodling, or maybe you're washing dishes, or you're gardening, or you're collecting and gathering, like cleaning out a junk drawer in your house. When we are doing something with our hands and we combine that with doing it in a mindful way, what it actually can do is it can help increase our focus. We tend to notice a big part of the mindful art practice is noticing what does the pen or pencil or marker feel like in my hand while I'm doodling? What is the sound of making that mark on the page? The visual experience as well. So it's really a very natural way to engage our sensory experience, which also helps us to be in the present moment because it's pretty challenging to think of the 15th item on our to-do list that's been there now for a week and a half when I'm also noticing the sounds and feeling the pen and noticing my breath or feeling the seat under my
Mm.
chair. So it's a really nice accessible way that I like. And then there's a whole lot of other benefits as well, where it can help to regulate your nervous system. So, essentially, just help you with managing stress. It can also help with increasing self expression, self esteem. There's all sorts
Mm.
of things. And I was working with a mom maybe 2 or 3 years ago where I was talking with her, and she actually sparked me to create a course that was more so for moms and for people who were really stressed out, and because she was talking about lashing out at her kids, or not lashing out but not showing up in the way she would have liked.
Sure.
And she was like, I've tried to meditate, I've tried to do mindfulness, I don't have the time, I can't really do that. What is this mindful art thing that? And so it's another, I mentioned that to just say it's another option that I've found to be really easy if you have tried to meditate or you have tried to practice mindfulness and that hasn't felt as accessible.
Yeah, and I love you said that because I do want to bring this up. Not everyone can meditate. It's stressful for some people, right? It's so now
Yeah.
I'm a meditator. I love meditating, but I definitely hear that people really could struggle with it. So, what happens? What's the difference by putting an actual pen or a paintbrush in your hand that really changes things so people can be mindful versus someone who's just trying to be mindful through meditation?
It's such a good question. So I remember I was teaching, I have a background as a meditation teacher and yoga teacher as well. And I remember I was teaching restorative yoga years ago, which is essentially where you lay on the ground with lots of pillows and blankets. You're totally supported. So it's not a very active, moving practice as far as when people think of yoga. And I remember I had a teacher years ago that used an example that said, if someone is stressed out, probably the last thing that you want to say to that person is, oh, just relax, or oh, just breathe. Or when I hear you say, if someone struggles with meditation, what immediately comes to mind for me is struggling with a breathing meditation. Sometimes, if you're really stressed out, the last thing that's going to feel really comfortable is to just sit and focus on your breath. And I've heard this from students. And so instead, what I've found is there's different things for everybody, right? This gives another opportunity to notice, is it easier for me to be with my breath or take a 2 minute reset or a 2 minute break by doodling? I have some practices I call breath doodles, where you're essentially doing a breathing meditation, but instead of just sitting with your eyes closed, focusing on your breath, you're actually doodling drawings and shapes of your breath. And it's a
Wow.
way of tracing your breath on the page. And it's actually called externalization when we can see that outside of ourselves. And it's just another way that makes it more accessible. Sometimes walking meditation is a more accessible way for
Sure.
people to meditate.
Yeah. Okay, so doodling while you're breathing. I love that actually. That's so smart because yeah, people do have a hard time. Some people actually kind of start panicking when they start concentrating on their breath, but doodling it and breathing with it sounds easier for some reason, right? Because you're thinking about it. Okay, so I know we're tapping into this a little bit. So give us some examples of this mindful art, right? Because right now people are going, okay, what is it?
Totally. So I'll just continue from what I was just speaking
Sure.
about initially. So I have these breath doodle
Mhm.
practices that I've created, which is really, I have about 15, 20 different types of doodles and drawings that you can do that are all tracing the breath. And so that's one thing. You literally can do it with a pen and paper or a sticky pad and a Sharpie at your desk when you're at work, or so it's very accessible. There are also different practices. So when I teach mindfulness and art together, I like to focus on a few different elements. So one is what's our sensory experience that I named, but also noticing what's happening with your body, perhaps your breath, or I mentioned earlier, just feeling on the ground. There's a practice that I teach where you do a scan through your body. So a lot of people have heard of body scan meditations. And again, instead of only meditating maybe with your eyes closed on a cushion and your back and knees hurt and you can't stay there, instead that you're able to just touch in and notice, oh, I'm feeling tension in my shoulders. And maybe in this moment that feels like a red squiggle that's knotted up. And to have that on the page, and then to also notice, okay, that's great, but maybe where else in my body am I feeling something that is cool and blue and spacious, like waves on the ocean that's calm, and noticing that and then feeling into that part. It might be your pinky or your big toe. And so I have a practice where I do this opposites practice with a body scan drawing meditation. But there's so many different activities that I teach, and they vary from doing them in 1 minute or 5 minutes. Some, if you have the time, you can do for 20 minutes or even an hour. But most of the practices I teach in my classes and my teacher trainings, the focus is on something that's really accessible
Yeah.
because everybody's busy, but especially moms. You're very busy. So I want it to be accessible.
Sure. Okay. So I think you said something about this client of yours that wasn't acting the way she really wanted to around her kids, right? Maybe a little reactive. We all have felt that. We all can relate to that. What's an activity that maybe that situation where you come home, your kids are just on, you're being reactive. What's an activity to get you back in the saddle, being more like you or who you'd like to be in those moments?
Yeah. So I've shared with her actually my cab driver. I was having my car worked on and I had to be like driven back to my house. And then, so she was my cab driver. So we had a whole chat about it on the drive. And so I shared with her, I'll share a couple of tips that involve art and actually some that don't involve art because sometimes we literally only have maybe 3 or 5 seconds. And I believe you can actually do a reset in a very short period of time. So I shared with her one thing that I do is when I walk through a doorway, like in my house, let's say as an example, I'll take a breath, an
Mm.
intentional breath as I walk through the doorway. If I'm sitting at a stoplight, I'll take 3 breaths at the stoplight while I'm waiting. Sometimes I'll go to in person events here where I live and it's trainings for other facilitators. And so I might not have my art supplies, but what I'll do is I'll trace my breath with a shape on my pant leg. So I treat my finger like a pen and I'll do that on my pant leg. But if you have the art supplies, and that might be something markers, colored pencils, crayons, things likely that you already have at home for your kiddos, especially since we're here with a lot of moms
Mhm.
listening, you can very simply do a few practices with just markers or just crayons. I would say if you want to be follow along with a few of them, I have a couple of resources. You can always go on my website at mindfulcreativemuse.com. I have a resources page that has videos, articles. You can follow along with some of them. And then I also have a workbook that is mindful art for kids, parents, and teachers. And that has 5 practices. And you can do them just on your own, but you can also do them with your kiddos if you feel inclined. So that's a bit easier because you can visually see it. It's harder for me to explain it just over audio with the podcast. Yeah.
Sure, that makes sense. Makes sense. So, what do you think is the difference between doing this mindful art for maybe calming your nervous system versus things like self-esteem, like imposter syndrome, things like that?
Yeah, I love this topic. Anybody who has been a student of mine for years or is on my email list hears me talk about imposter syndrome and the inner critic all the time.
Mm.
It's my jam. I really appreciate talking about it because
Sure.
I have had a lot of experience with it personally, and I see it as so much of our shared human experience that it comes up. So I think 2 things to answer your question. One is that the practices themselves, the mindful art practices, how I see the practice is that it really helps widen our capacity to be in the present moment and to be with discomfort, with the ups and downs of life. And so that might be calming our nervous system. It also is just expanding that capacity. So I think of it of a container or a bowl. And if you have a salty solution in a really small bowl, if you make the bowl a lot larger with more water and the same amount of salt, it's going to be less potent. So that's one thing is foundationally, it just widens our capacity. There are some practices that I teach. I have one that I call our inner critic and our inner muse. And it's like a 2-part visual practice with 2 columns on each side in a shape. And you create these different marks. And then you actually write in response to those marks to notice what is my inner critic telling me. What you can also do it around imposter syndrome. What are some of those blocks? And what I've noticed is that, at least for me, but I've noticed this with students as well, sometimes if we just try to think about something or write about something, it's not quite as accessible. Or we might understand it logically, but that doesn't mean that we know how to move through those blocks.
Mhm.
And so instead, what I've noticed is having this process, mindfulness, mark making, and then writing where we're reflecting can really help to move past some of those blocks or at least bring it up to our awareness, which is a step in the right direction I found for me. And yeah, so I've noticed that can really help move through some of those blocks around imposter syndrome and help improve our self-esteem. And the last thing I'll say is that there's so much permission in this practice. The first thing we talked about is that you don't have to be an artist. It doesn't have to look a certain way. There's no pressure around the practice. So you're actually training this muscle of giving yourself permission to create and being kind to yourself. And those things I feel really also help support your self-expression and your self-esteem.
Sure. Yeah. And it seems like there's something magical when the pen or whatever hits the paper, right? There's something that actually is triggered in our brain with this creativity, isn't it? So, unlike maybe traditionally talking or talk therapy, where you would talk to somebody about maybe this imposter syndrome or your inner critic, is it actually accessing maybe different parts of the brain that allows us to move through easier?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So, part of what happens, so I mentioned bringing in writing as well.
Sure. Yeah.
I personally don't typically start with the writing because access is a different part of our brain. Instead, I start from the body up. So, noticing
Mm.
that sensory experience, creating those marks and shapes, and then noticing what we might think about those and then moving into words. And so we are actually accessing different parts of our brain. And what we're also doing, what I've noticed especially, is that as I calm my nervous system, I'm able to access more parts of my brain and physiology that allows me to have thoughts. Your prefrontal cortex, there, I really like Dr. Dan Siegel talks about if you flipped your lid, if you're stressed out, your prefrontal cortex, the part where you can think of different ideas and formulate that, goes offline because it's just not as accessible. So there's a whole lot of science to back that up as well. But that's, I think, the kind of ground level I always talk about is that we can do these things to help support our own self care and help bring us back to a baseline, which is what our body's always naturally wanting to do. And then I always like to say it's still not art therapy, so it is different, but it
Mhm.
is a tool that you can use for yourself for your own self-care.
Yeah. And when you were talking about all that with your the parts of the brain and stuff, it reminded me, I think I was reading, is it Body Keeps the Score, right? I remember, have you heard of that one? And they were talking about trauma and stress and how our creativity is much, we can't be creative in those states. And it's funny because I was like, oh my God, yeah, I lost my creativity really heightened and in this kind of panic area. So it's nice. I think it's nice because it's this mindfulness, but it's also then allowing us to regain that creativity too, because even further than art, but in life, having more creativity with our choices and our paths that we choose and things like that too. It probably just branches out, right?
Absolutely. I always say that. I feel like we're all creative and our creativity comes out in different ways. It might be drawing and painting for someone, and for someone else, it might be the way you solve a math problem, the way you organize your laundry room at your house, the way that you go out and create something else in the world. But absolutely, I agree with you that if we're in a place of just literally trying to tread water and survive, we're not going to be as freed up to then tap into our creativity. So it's just a really nurturing way that we can, that old cliche of secure your own oxygen mask first.
Yeah.
I feel like cliches are cliches for a reason. So it really is just supporting yourself, as you mentioned, like at the top of your to-do list first, and then being able to access more of your creativity in whatever way that shows up in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many ways to be creative. Exactly. It's not just painting and drawing, right? So that's really cool. Okay. So where can the listeners find you and tell us some of the great stuff that you offer?
Yeah, so the best way to find me is on my website at mindfulcreativemuse.com. On there, you'll see that resources page, which will those videos and articles. There should be a link at the very top that you can download that free workbook I mentioned, or you can find that you'll see a button on there that it'll show you where you can download that for free as well. And then it's totally optional. You can join my email list when you do that. You don't have to. If you do want to, I also send out weekly tips and other quick little videos and things that you can do in 2 minutes, 5 minutes.
Awesome. I love little 2-minute tips. They were the best. So, what is one thing you want parents to start doing today? Is there like an activity or it's just anything that you really want them to do after listening to this podcast?
I think the first thing I would say is if you remember nothing else, that you can have these mini resets in your day for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, moments where the pressure is just like a pressure valve. The pressure is just released for a few minutes and you can really tend to yourself. And then the easiest ways that I usually like to recommend doing that is through some of the breath doodle practices I mentioned and some of the activities you'll see in the workbook. But I think that I hear a lot of times people say, oh, I'm not a creative, or I don't have these supplies, or I don't have the time. Time is and so that's why I would just say, Like you can give yourself the gift of a reset and self care in just 2 or 5 minutes in a very simple way. Yeah.
Yeah, and these activities sound like something in the moment if you're a mom with little ones, right? That you can almost do them together, right?
Exactly.
You can both
Yeah.
be working on your breath doodle. It could be great for everybody.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's 5 activities in the workbook that you could easily do with your kiddos as well. I chose ones that are really accessible. That's largely what I do. I train K through 12 teachers how to
Mm.
mindful art practices with kids, and then also supporting parents with sharing with kids as well. So it's I've taught people who are working with kids as young as 2 years old, and I've taught people up to 80 plus years old. So there's no bound when it comes to that. I think it's just knowing how to modify the practices so it's age appropriate. And so some of that is in the workbook and then definitely in the teacher training too.
For sure. Yes. It's because we all need to be regulated. And when you're regulated, everyone around you will be more regulated, right? Because we all take a little bit of what our environment is giving us, right? If I'm around somebody who's calm, I feel calm. So that just helps all around. So great. This is such a great tool. Sounds like it's super easy. The breath work is something you could do anywhere, obviously, and take it anywhere. So thank you so much for just explaining what mindful art is. Now we know, and giving us those handouts so that we can start doing it at home.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Cynthia or grab some of those freebies that she has on her website, just click on the link in the show notes. And until next time, keep carving out time for yourself and keep putting yourself on top of your to do list.